Be on the screen there.
I just went.
Everybody. Hello everybody out there in the virtual world, live streaming from Facebook. We've got a lovely small group here at the moment. We are currently in Preston Hub, at the Preston Hub office. You may have never visited this office, but it's a cute little small cozy room. We do have a few other offices around the corner and a big open space in the middle as well. We've also got a little bit of supper for everybody who's attending tonight, so apologies for the people at home. You can't share our cheese and biscuits, unfortunately. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Maxine Buxton. I look after our information, learning and training, and a few other things at Big Deaf. Tonight we are really pleased to have Sherry Beaver with us. Sherry Beaver is from Deaf Victoria. So Sherry will talk a little bit about Deaf Victoria and what kind of work they do, especially in terms of emergency situations and how they can advocate and help support us and our work at Big Deaf as well. I'd also like to remind people, for the people we have in attendance tonight and for people watching from home, that if you do have any questions or comments or queries about interpreting or emergency services, please feel free to type your question. We have the lovely Olivia here, who will come on screen now. Hello everyone. So Olivia Beasley, she will be watching the Facebook page just to monitor to make sure that if anybody has any questions or concerns or queries, you can type those questions and she will pass them on to me. We will then sign the questions so everybody can see and we'll do our best to answer them.
Hopefully.
I'd also like to say a quick thank you to Darebin City Council for sponsoring us for tonight's event. Okay, I think that's all the housekeeping.
You haven't introduced another person.
Oh, of course, yes. We do have the fabulous Sam. He's always in the background helping us out with our live streaming. It's a bit too hard for Sam to come up. He's sort of blocked in here and he probably doesn't want to come up on screen anyway. He's a bit shy. He's a quiet achiever.
Exactly.
Okay, so over to you, Sherry.
Thank you. Thanks, Maxine. I'm really pleased to be here tonight for Vic Deaf. Maxine and Olivia invited me to come along. I wanted to outline a little bit about what Vic Deaf offers and also Deaf Victoria, the organisation that's here for deaf and hard of hearing people to provide advocacy services and information services for deaf and hard of hearing people throughout the state. We get funding from DHHS and we're very grateful for that funding, because without that support we wouldn't be able to do our jobs. My role at Deaf Victoria is Policy and Community Engagement Officer, and that is what I do actually is work with the deaf community, deaf and hard of hearing people throughout the state, and we have a number of stakeholders, deaf organisations throughout Victoria, the Victorian Government, disability organisations. We work with them to make sure that deaf and hard of hearing people feel fully included and can access things that relate to their lives. So in Victoria we work, and if you want any more information, go to our website or Facebook page and feel free to send us any queries at all. We're more than happy to chat with you. So before we go ahead with tonight's agenda, I'll give you a bit of background information about emergency interpreting and how the whole thing started. Maybe a few of you will remember back in 2010, 2011, there was quite a dramatic flood situation. I'm sure that's in your memory banks, and that was in Queensland. And at the time, we didn't have interpreters organised for emergency announcements, and deaf people felt that event really impacted on them, and it was widespread throughout the state in Queensland. And people in Queensland were really suffering from lack of information, and everything was delivered in English, and a lot of people missed out. And there was a lot of highfalutin words used. People didn't know what they needed to do in the situation that they were in. And so they had a police Facebook page. Deaf Services Queensland had their communication pages, but what they decided to do, the Queensland Government decided to bring in interpreters for the media conferences, and that's where we started the need for interpreters, sign language interpreters, for emergency announcements. Things such as floods, cyclones, bushfires, a whole number of things. So it was really quite a big change. So I might hand over to Maxine now to take over.
Great, thanks Sherry. So yeah, Sherry was explaining what happened in Queensland with the floods that happened at the time, and that was really the first time that we had an Auslan interpreter on the news. It did happen a few times throughout that situation, and the community really started to realise that there was a huge benefit in having that direct information given to them straight through an Auslan interpreter, rather than having to rely on neighbours or family to receive that information. So we have since then had a few things happen in Victoria, and VicDeaf started to realise it would be best to work with different organisations, start to partner with those organisations and try to educate those organisations on why it's important to have Auslan interpreters there for emergency, large emergency announcements such as bushfires or floods or perhaps terrorism, something like that. So VicDeaf do have partnerships with a few organisations. The EMV, Emergency Management Victoria, Victorian Police, and a few other organisations out there. So we've partnered with them to try and provide Auslan interpreters for their important announcements, and you've probably seen that happen quite a lot recently. You may have seen on Facebook, Vic Police have had a big announcement that they put up on their Facebook page. Recently there was a crime event that happened. So you can see that this is improving, having interpreters available. I can't say it's 100% perfect yet, but our aim is to improve over time so that service is available to the deaf and hard of hearing community. VicDeaf have also set up a special interpreting team because many interpreters have never interpreted on the news or for a live event or a live announcement, especially with people like a minister or a policeman talking, and they may not know the correct way to interpret that information. So VicDeaf decided to set up a particular team of interpreters. They hand-selected the right interpreters that had the correct qualifications and skills, and then trained up that pool of interpreters, which means they have the confidence to interpret for an emergency situation. I think it also happened about 2 or 3 years ago that VicDeaf received a grant or some funding to do a special project called the NEMP, which is the National Emergency Management Project. The aim of that project was to really advocate for having interpreters on TV such as Channel 7, Channel 9, 10, SBS, and raise their awareness for broadcasters to make sure they're aware of making sure the Auslan interpreter is actually on screen rather than cutting them half off the screen, for example. Also setting up some resources for the deaf and hard of hearing community, and also having resources available for broadcasters and media themselves in those organisations. So we're really proud of that project. Some of those resources from the project are still live and a lot of people don't know about them. We do have a live website and it's really worth checking it out and having a look at that website. If you're unsure how to prepare, if there is an emergency or a natural disaster occurring in your area, there are a couple of websites we'd like to share tonight. Sherry, I think I might ask you to show the 2 websites if that's okay.
Sure. So we'll just get this up on the screen. I'm just sharing the password here.
Oh.
Caps lock.
987.
I got it. Come and do it, Sam.
Maybe start talking, Sherry, while we're sorting out the technology. Oh, technological fail. So there are actually 2 websites that we'll demonstrate and go through tonight. The first one is Deaf Emergency Information. So that's the first website. And this was created by a project team a year before the National Emergency Management Project team was established. This was resources that were developed for hard of hearing and deaf people who use Auslan, and especially about people who especially wanted to find out about emergency events, things like floods, bushfires, cyclones and storms. And this information included pre the emergency event, during and after. So how you prepared for an emergency, what you did or should do through an emergency, and then post-emergency. What would you do after the emergency has passed? So it was generic information as to things like how to pack your emergency kit, the important things that you needed to put into your kit, how to contact people to get information on the emergency to keep safe. It's a really brilliant website and I highly recommend that you have a look at it. And if you want to know more information on different types of emergencies, take a look. And we might have a look just quickly, Maxine's saying. I'll go back a bit. We might just give you some examples by demonstrating here what the site has to offer. So this has great information about floods, pre, during and post event. This video will explain to you what risks there are if there is a flood event predicted, what you should do. And all videos are in Auslan and are captioned, so they're fully accessible. Will we watch a little one? I'll watch a little bit of one.
We won't watch the whole video.
No, not the whole one. So, that's an example. And it's in Auslan, and so it's very easy for those people who are Auslan users to be able to access and feel confident in their preparations and also their actions during an event and post an event. The second website that I'd like to mention is called the National Auslan Communications for Emergencies website, and this was created under the National Emergency Management Project that was conducted 2 years ago. This website is not just for deaf and hard of hearing people, it's actually for people in emergency services, people who are working in the broadcasting industry. There's emergency information for deaf and hard of hearing people, and it's all in Auslan, and a lot of organisations throughout the country have created resources. You will see on the first website that there might be some information that you're looking for that's missing. Well, that will be on this new website. And there's also new productions that were made through the project. Things like landslides and earthquakes, a number of emergencies. There's also information for emergency services in terms of how they should communicate with those who are deaf and hard of hearing or deaf-blind in an emergency situation. So there were new resources and videos created to explain the best ways to communicate with deaf and deaf-blind people in emergencies. And with the broadcasters, ABC, 7 and so on, there was explanations there about how to frame the interpreter in the screen. So that means that there's optimal viewing for deaf and hard of hearing audiences. This project was funded by the federal government under the Attorney General's Department. And it's a great project. It was a great project, and VicDeaf led this in partnership with deaf societies throughout the country. So I'd just like to demonstrate one example of one of the videos.
There's
We
no
don't-
NBN in Preston, obviously, Sherry.
Oh, no NBN. Oh, that's the problem. Oh, we need to get the government to get on their bikes with that one. With this website, there's also information for Auslan English interpreters in terms of how best to prepare to interpret for these type of events. So it's got a lot of valuable information for a whole number of stakeholders. Oh, it is a bit slow, isn't it? It's a good example that we need to demonstrate to the government that we need to hurry up with the rollout of the NBN. Okay, deafblind is the tab I'd like you to click on. Yep. If you go down, oh, it's disappeared. Resources. Ah, that's the one. Okay, the one down the bottom there. Play. And this is just an example of a video that's been created. It was created for emergency services personnel. We do need the NBN, definitely. That's great. Thanks, Maxine. So this National Emergency Management website is very good. It's got a lot of important information. You can look at it in your own time. Over to you. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks, Sherry. So maybe some of you at home were watching last night. We did have a bit of talk about health information. Was anybody there? Maybe some people at home would have seen. You did, Sherry? You saw it?
Yes, I did.
So last night I talked about Signs for Health website, which is a really great website. It's in both English and Auslan, and it means deaf people can watch and understand their rights in terms of receiving an interpreting service within a hospital and what they should do throughout the hospital appointment and their responsibilities and rights. So it's really great. You can actually print off that information and give it to a hospital if you like. So it's also great if you've got a deaf or deaf-blind, maybe hard of hearing family member or someone in your area. You can alert them to this information. There perhaps is a deaf person that lives in a remote area and you may be worried about them and what happens if there's a fire in their area and what they should do to prepare. There's a lot of information on both of these websites on what to pack in your kit, what you need to prepare beforehand rather than just right when the emergency happens thinking about it. So what you can do beforehand to prepare for these types of events. And whether you should stay in the house or go. So this is a really great resource for preparing all of that information rather than just thinking, oh, an emergency will never happen to me, a flood's never going to happen to my house, or there will never be a fire in my house. You never know what might happen. So it's better to prepare. If you're bored at home one night, it's worth having a look at and thinking, why not watch some emergency videos tonight and prepare just in case, touch wood it doesn't happen, but just in case something wants to happen.
And life is very important. We value our lives.
Absolutely, and you never know what might happen in life.
Exactly.
So we've talked a little bit about sort of big, large emergencies like natural disasters and events like that that might occur maybe announcements on the news where we might need an interpreter. But now we'd like to talk more about personal life emergencies or situations that may occur in your life where you might need to go to hospital all of a sudden. Perhaps you noticed or witnessed a crime and you'd like to tell somebody about that, and you wonder what you need to do and how a deaf person might have access to an interpreter through that situation. Can you talk about that, Sherry?
Yes, sure. All right, so as Maxine said, we've got natural disasters and those types of emergencies. What if it's an emergency that relates to you and your personal life? Your mum's sick at 2 a.m. and you need to go to the hospital, and how do you get an interpreter? How do you request the hospital to book an interpreter? So if you go to the hospital, you need to request the interpreter straight away. You need to tell the staff in the hospital, sorry, I'm tired, I'm mixing up all my signs, sorry, bit of jet lag. Okay, I'll go back. So you arrive at the hospital, you need to immediately request an interpreter when you arrive, because the interpreter needs to be booked and get the information as soon as possible. But what will happen if the hospital says, oh no, we can't book an interpreter because it's 2 o'clock in the morning, interpreters only work 9 to 5. It's not true. There are interpreter services that operate 24/7, and there's a phone number to call. Auslan Connections has a 24/7 service, and Maxine will outline that in a minute. And there's a card from Auslan Connections that you can actually use to show anybody. And also, there's information on the back of the card specifying your needs and what to do. So whether it's at a police station or with a police officer or any other emergency service worker or at a hospital, you need to inform the hospital. Because, for example, if a deaf person gets to the hospital asking for an interpreter, sometimes it happens that they're waiting for 6 hours before an interpreter has arrived. And that means that the barrier to communication has been 6 hours long. So I'm sure that you don't like to annoy the staff, but sometimes you need to just remind them, because it's important that you get the immediate information, especially if your life's in danger. So, you know, if you're very sick, you or your family member or a child perhaps, it's important to have an interpreter there. So also if you go to the police station and you're wanting to report a crime, for example, Victoria Police have to provide interpreters for you, because you need to be able to clearly communicate with police staff. And if you feel a little bit uneasy and the police officer asks for you to write notes, sometimes when you're in that stressful situation, it's very hard for you to function writing English. So you need to insist on having an interpreter. And not having an interpreter means that you're not going to get your needs met quickly. So please advocate for yourselves and ask for an interpreter. It might be that you've been involved in a house fire. You need to be able to talk with those personnel from the fire department. So, yeah, I've just forgotten what I had to say next. Help, remind me. My brain's still catching up. Got that jet lag.
That's fine, Sherry. I'm wondering if I could ask the people here in the room, and perhaps the people that are watching through Facebook as well, if you've got any thoughts or comments, but how many people have some of these cards? In your wallet, in your bag, in your car? It's a bit hot in here. You might use them as a fan. It is a bit of a small, cosy room. I'll just show them to the camera. Can you see them there? Sorry, I'll get a bit closer. So it really surprised me that VicDeaf made these cards. We've had them for quite a few years now, but I've met quite a number of deaf people out in the community, and usually they say, oh, I've never even seen these cards. Where are they from? What are they for? So I think this is a perfect little thing to have in your wallet or in your bag or in your pocket or wherever it might be, just in case. I hope it doesn't happen, but if there is an emergency and you do have to go to the hospital, or if you need to call an ambulance, and you can just show them that card. It makes life a lot easier. And I know you can't just blow a whistle and then your personal interpreter comes there like magic. Yeah, unfortunately that can't happen. But hospitals and police can ring that number. Like Sherry was saying before, it's available 24/7. And Auslan Connections, which is VicDeaf's interpreting service, have a 24/7 interpreting service for hospital emergencies or police emergencies. They can accept calls even at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there will be an interpreter that wakes up to that call, or a booking officer will wake up and answer that phone call. And once that booking officer finds out what the need of that phone call is, whether it be a police or a hospital job, they will then call around and find an available interpreter. So that may mean that the booking officers are not very popular, having to wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and waking up all these interpreters, but we can't guarantee also that there will be an interpreter there right straight away on the spot, but we will try our best and as quickly as possible to find an available interpreter. In the past, we have also used interpreters through our VRI, Video Remote Interpreting Service, for emergencies. It could be someone in a remote location that lives out in the country, and Auslan Connections have utilised the VRI interpreting service for emergencies. So that was a successful way to communicate and get an interpreter in for that emergency situation using technology such as VRI service. So there are options available. So hopefully deaf people can feel confident to ask for an interpreter there. They can show the emergency service personnel the card, tell them what their needs are, and then they will arrange an interpreter. Do we have a question here? Would you like to come up and sign your question? Just so the people from home can see. Thank you.
If you're in a hospital, in an emergency situation, if you're a female, you might not be comfortable if a male interpreter turns up. How do you manage that? Can you ask the hospital to please try and get a female interpreter if it's an emergency, for example?
Great. Great question. I think it's very important to always feel confident to ask and tell them, the person, what you need. If you need an interpreter that understands a lot of finger spelling, or if you prefer a female interpreter, maybe you prefer a male interpreter, you should always feel comfortable and confident to ask for what you prefer. But obviously we know that there's not enough interpreters available, so sometimes you might ask and say, I'd like to have a female interpreter. And the booking officer will try their very best to find a female interpreter. They'll try to swap things around and try to make that happen. But perhaps they'll let you know, unfortunately, there isn't a female available, but there is a male available. Would you like to go ahead, or would you rather cancel the appointment or reschedule, that kind of thing. So it doesn't matter what your needs or preferences are. You should feel confident to assert yourself and tell the person what it is that you prefer and that you need. I know that there are other Auslan interpreter agencies out there, and they obviously organise their interpreters in their own way, but I know that if an interpreter has a request or a preference, or maybe they have a list of preferred interpreter names, they may be male or female, Auslan Connections will always try their best to find the best suited interpreter for you. And we will always let you know if we can't find those preferred interpreters, and we may ask you if you have any other preferred interpreters or any other people that you might accept as your interpreter for that occasion, but we will always try our best to suit your needs. Unfortunately, it can't be 100% of the time. We wish it was. And we need to clone interpreters. I think that would be a great idea if we could clone interpreters. There's probably people watching at home that may be skilled in science and genetics and cloning. If you are, please let us know. You never know. Now, any other questions at all from our participants? And Libby, do we have any questions on our live stream? Oh, we do. Okay, so Olivia was just telling us what the question was on the Facebook live stream. The question was about preparing for emergencies and some of the videos that are available. Are these for Australia-wide, all of these resources?
Yeah, I can
or-
explain that.
Thanks, Sherry.
The first website that I mentioned, Deaf Emergency Info, that was made in Victoria, and it's a Victorian-based website and Victorian-based information. But the second website, Auslan Emergency website, that is throughout the country because it was a national project. So that information is covering all the needs of all deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind people in Australia. But both websites have really vital information on them, so you can access both wherever you are. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, great, that's right. I'm wondering if you're in Tasmania and something happened in Tasmania, I'm sure there are differences between floods in Tasmania and Queensland, but there are things like landslides, floods, all of those things, all those natural disasters, and I'm sure the information would probably still suit that from Tasmania and Queensland.
Yeah, that second website I mentioned has all of that information on it.
What's the name of the second website?
Auslan Communications for Emergencies. No?
Oh, so it's Auslan.
Communications for Emergencies.
Oh, right.
What we'll do is,
So what we'll do is we'll pop all of those websites on, oh, we actually have already done that. We'll put them on the Facebook live stream so that you can access those websites, and you can just click the link, and for the people that are here in the room, you can also go home and have a look at them later. Oh, you've got another question? Oh, we've got an attendee that doesn't have Facebook. That's okay, we can get that to you. I'm happy to also email people as well. So if you email us at info, at vicdeaf.com.au, we'll be happy to send you through all of those website links. Also, before we started, Sherry did ask me if there's any deaf people watching from home, and those people from home may want some of these cards. If they did want some of those cards, I'd be happy to send them through to you. So if you can just email me at that info@vicdeaf.com.au, I'll be happy to send some out to you. You can also visit VicDeaf in East Melbourne, and we've got heaps of them at VicDeaf that we can give out. So you're welcome to come in and visit, and we'll hand them on out. Do we have another question online, Olivia? Okay, so the question is, if I'm a deaf person and I go to a hospital, or perhaps I go to a police station, and I tell them that I would like an interpreter, you know, I'd like to be able to communicate through an interpreter, and if that person then says, oh no, we can't book you one, sorry, there's not enough time, or we don't have the money to, or something like that, what should I do if they refuse to book an interpreter?
right. That's a brilliant question. If we're talking about Victoria, if you arrive at a hospital or at a police station and you request an interpreter and they say they can't afford it or it can't be arranged, or they use funding as a problem, they can book interpreters because the Victorian government have what's called a credit line. So all agencies that are government funded are covered for interpreting costs. So it's not an out-of-pocket expense for that particular organisation. So that means that they have to book an interpreter anyway. And if they say, oh, time is an issue, you need to let them know that you can book an interpreter at any time of day or night. We have a 24/7 number at Auslan Connections, it's, as Maxine said, so any time of the day you can get an interpreter.
And if they do still refuse to book an interpreter, what could you do? Let's say I'm at the hospital, there's an emergency, perhaps I'm bleeding from the head, I've said I need an interpreter and they're telling me no, you can't have an interpreter. What would I do? Do I just stand there with my head bleeding out?
If they
I need
can't
stitches.
organise an interpreter in person, you could ask for a video relay interpreter. That's another way. Like you could use your phone and hook up with an interpreter online. And if the hospital has an iPad, they might be able to let you use that. But if that fails, then
So if I'm really bleeding from the head and I think I really need to just go in and get my stitches now, I don't want surgery or anything like that, and I don't want to have a scar, I don't want to look ugly, I think I need stitches. So if I'm currently standing in the hospital and I think, oh, don't worry about it, I'll just get my stitches done, don't worry about the interpreter, but then afterwards...
maybe they give me drugs and I go home. Yeah.
So if I just go home, do I then just forget about it? I can't do anything about that situation, or can I do something after the fact?
You certainly can. If you are at a hospital, as Maxine described in that example, bleeding from the head and they won't provide an interpreter and time is important, when you get home, you need to think about the fact that they wouldn't provide the interpreter. So you can actually submit a complaint to the hospital. They have a complaints department, so they need to then take your complaint and look into it so that it can be resolved, so that it doesn't happen again. And if the hospital isn't going to resolve the issue for you, they can contact us at Deaf Victoria to advocate and improve the situation. Deaf Victoria has produced a report about hospitals throughout Victoria, and that report was the impetus for Signs for Health, that website. So we've collaborated with all the hospitals throughout the country, throughout Victoria, on that project, and they're mostly committed, but Deaf Vic are committed to ensuring that there's access to interpreting all over the state. And if it doesn't work for you at that level, you can go to the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission and make a complaint there so that it is resolved and deaf and hard of hearing people are provided the access they need to have in these situations.
Great. Please don't sit down. I've got another question for you. Okay, so if that does happen where I've gone to hospital, they haven't provided me with an interpreter, and I get home and I think I'm not satisfied, I feel really ill by what happened in that situation. So perhaps I have a look on the hospital's website and I find the complaint process. Perhaps they have a form that I can fill out, or an online form, or maybe I have to email them. But what if I don't have great English skills? Can Deaf Victoria support me, or perhaps I can submit it in Auslan?
Definitely. Some deaf people aren't confident with their English skills, so if they want to come into the office, I'm more than happy to type things out for them, get the form sorted and send it off. So we're more than happy to work with you to make sure that you get your complaint resolved.
That's great. So I'm wondering who else works in the Deaf Victoria office? It's you and?
Yeah, there's 2 staff members, myself and staff member who's just started last month. Yeah, a bit more than a month ago now. And this advocate is Simon Anderson. Simon. And Simon's looking after advocacy for Deaf Victoria. And so if you need any assistance with advocacy or complaining about services, that's his role. So you can email him at advocacy@deafvictoria.org.au, and we will put up those email addresses for you on the Facebook page. So contact him, because he works on individual advocacy, whereas my role is systemic or group advocacy.
Great, okay. So that means if an event does happen where you've had a bad experience in a hospital or a police station and you haven't been able to access interpreting services, you did request it, but you don't feel satisfied with the result, and you may not feel confident to write that complaint or the letter of complaint, get in contact with Sherry through Skype or book an appointment. You can sit down with her, have a chat in Auslan and explain it all to Sherry, and she'll support you to write that letter of complaint.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. We do have another question. I'm not sure if you can answer, or maybe we can try to find out the
I'll
answer.
do my best.
So the question's about if there is an emergency of some kind, perhaps my house has been broken into, or it's falling down, or something's happened. Perhaps I loved it we saw on that video where the house was floating away because of the flood. Well, I didn't love it, but it was very clear, visual Auslan. So if something like that happens and I have to get out of my house, where can I find information on a safe place to go to, or some shelter perhaps that I can find, or maybe there's a shelter set up? Where can I find that information?
That's a great question. If you need to evacuate your home, you can get information through a number of sources. Your state emergency service, their website will have a list of information. Their website will have the details. Their Facebook page as well. And if you don't have Facebook, you can access their website. Sometimes the Red Cross has information, but most of the time evacuation centres don't provide interpreters. So if you're needing to know what's going on, you can ask the evacuation centre to provide you with an interpreter, and you can again use these cards to ask them to get an interpreter there, or maybe on Skype or through the internet. It might be an emergency where an interpreter can't access where you are. So if the internet's not working, things happen like that. So, but you try your best. You might have to just write notes until that situation can be rectified. We just don't know what could happen. But there's lots of information on websites, and also asking your neighbours for information is another source. And calling emergency services through the National Relay Service is another option. Question through Facebook is somebody wanted to know what hours are Deaf Victoria open. Most of the time Simon and I are working Wednesday to Friday from 9 till 5 on those 3 days, and Simon sometimes will work Mondays to Fridays, but if you're wanting to work with Simon, email him directly so that you can work out when he's working and make an appointment.
Yeah, better to make an appointment.
Yeah, it is better to make a time because our hours are flexible from week to week, but generally speaking, we're there from Wednesdays through to Fridays, 9 to 5.
Great. Now, this is relevant to the last question in terms of where to find emergency information. I think it's really important to make sure that you like your local area council on Facebook, for example, or any local deaf societies in your area, any local networks. Like them on Facebook so that if they are putting up updates or sharing information, you have access to that information. Usually VicDeaf do put up updates or posts on Facebook and share all that information if there is an emergency occurring. So it's important that people are networking with each other and sharing that information.
And Deaf Victoria will also share emergency information as well.
Yeah. Oh, do we have any more questions on the live stream? Doesn't look like any more questions on the live stream. I'm wondering if there's any questions from the attendees in the room. Any other questions about emergency interpreting? No? Everyone's straight? Oh, we do have a question.
So if you're with a deaf person, you're hearing, and you go to the hospital with that deaf person and the staff there say, oh, we'll book one, but for now, we'll write notes, or can you interpret? But I want to look after the person I'm with. I don't want to be their interpreter because I feel like my personal feelings might influence the interpreting. So how do I negotiate with the staff at, say, the hospital to book an interpreter? It's a brilliant question. When deaf people go to the hospital or to the police station with their partners who might not be deaf, or a friend, then often the emergency services personnel might ask them to interpret. You actually shouldn't do that at all, because there is that boundary and that line because you are emotionally attached to that deaf person, you're wanting to support them in a different role. The best thing you can do is to explain and advocate that you're not going to interpret for your deaf friend or partner or family member, because you don't want to have that bias or be compromised. So to have a professional interpreter is much better than having somebody that's not accredited as well. So making sure that they are credentialed and knowing what to do in such an emergency. And that way you can focus on the person that you're with and support them. Does that answer your question?
Could I add something, Sherry? Also, I'd like to say something about duty of care. And also about informed consent. So I think it would be important to say to the nurse, I think, I'm emotionally connected to this person, this is my partner, or this is my friend, or perhaps your parent, and I feel that if I was to interpret for this person, I wouldn't do the best or most appropriate job, and I could put that person at harm or at risk. Their health could be at risk because of my interpreting service. So I would rather that responsibility be on the hospital and not on me. I don't want to be liable for something. If they then go into surgery and they hadn't agreed to it, I don't want to be liable for that. But I do know that sometimes it happens where people just feel they have to do it, they're not comfortable, but they don't have time to make an informed decision. But if that is happening to you and you do interpret through that situation, what could I do afterwards? Could I still make a complaint about that if I did have to interpret when I don't think I should have?
It's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that, Maxine. I'm not an interpreter myself, so I think, yeah.
Well, if the deaf person wanted an interpreter, but they didn't receive that service...
Now I'm clear. Okay. Well, again, the deaf person could come and make a complaint. They could complain to the hospital, or if the deaf person knew which interpreting agency the hospital used, they could actually talk to them as well and let them know. I can give you an example of a situation. Deaf person needed surgery. Sorry, my sign's not that clear tonight. The deaf person needs surgery. Surgery, wherever it may be, on the hand, on the body, and the surgeon wanted to explain what was going to go on during the procedure. So the interpreter would be signing the information, and then the form was given to the deaf person to sign. And the interpreter also had to sign the form to say that they'd well and truly interpreted all of the information to the deaf person to prove that they actually had an interpreter there. So, and if a deaf person feels unsure, then they certainly can make a complaint.
So it looks like we've got another question in the room and also on Facebook. Oh no, you're first, please go ahead. So Olivia's just telling us the question from Facebook. So where can we find the information about deaf-blind people in an emergency, or for deaf-blind people in an emergency? Where might deaf-blind people go to find that information?
Well, the information on emergencies is accessible in many formats on the second website, the communications one. So there are some information there that is accessible for some deaf-blind people, but yeah, we could try and make sure that that information is available for them.
So does that mean that that website, I know that some deaf-blind people have a special screen reader, so that screen reader can download the information and pop it up on their braille reader. Is that what it would be?
And there's also two things. The website has videos, as you would have seen earlier, and there's also a PDF or a document that can be opened, and that can then be converted to braille. or a screen reader. So, yeah, both options are available.
Fantastic.
One audience member asked whether there was information so that deaf-blind people could actually access the information. So yes, you can enlarge the screen, you can also download the text.
Did you have a question here? Yes, come on. So last year I went to hospital for an emergency and I gave them one of those cards and said that I needed an interpreter, and they sort of panicked a little bit and walked off, and they went to get a nurse, and they said the nurse could sign. So they brought a nurse in that could sign with me, but not well. They couldn't sign fluently. So what should I have done in that situation? Were you satisfied with that interpreter? No. She was not satisfied with the nurse who could sign. What should she have done?
You can make a complaint to the hospital because what the hospital did wasn't right. The hospital should always provide a certified professional interpreter or credentialed interpreter from an agency because they have the skills to interpret. That nurse may not have had the interpreting skills required. So if she interpreted for you, you might not have received all of the information, whereas a credentialed interpreter will ensure that you're satisfied and ensure that you know what's going on and understanding what's going on, and will work with you to ensure that you can make decisions for yourself. So that nurse may not have had the skills to do that. So if it happens again, please make a complaint. And if you need any support, Deaf Victoria can support you in that.
So that means in that situation, did that happen a year ago, did you say, or last year that happened?
So that's recent. So if you wanted to make a complaint, you could still do so. Yeah, so you can get in contact with us.
So it's not too late to make a complaint? I thought that, you know, sometimes if an emergency did occur and a deaf person arrived at a hospital and asked for an interpreter and they didn't get one and they just put up with the fact that they didn't have one, and then they're still in hospital and lots of things are happening, they get well, they go back home, and then if it happens that it's like 4 months later, and it's only then that they realise they weren't satisfied with that situation and the fact that they didn't receive an interpreter, they decide they would like to do something about it, but they're not feeling comfortable or confident to do so. And it's not until 4 months later they decide they want to. Can they do something then?
They sure can. So if you're in that situation, you need to focus on yourself and your health. And that's where your attention will be. And maybe you've gotten into somebody signing but you haven't understood. And it's not until time goes by that you think about it and you think, oh, I've got the energy now. And on reflection, what happened wasn't right. So you can make that complaint.
Great. Okay, great. I think it's almost 7 o'clock, so we've passed the hour already, I think. Wow.
Nobody wants to go home to see Home and Away tonight? Not in a rush? Oh, I don't like that show, so it's okay. Sorry.
Livy said, my house rules.
Okay. Oh, not watching TV.
Home and Away's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it? So I wanted to say thank you, Sherry, for presenting tonight. I think it was really valuable to learn about what deaf and hard of hearing people can do in an emergency situation and what supports are out there in those types of situations. And if a disaster does happen, that you can still make a complaint afterwards, or you can still ask for help after it's happened. It's not too late. The train hasn't gone. You still can make a complaint.
Yes.
So perhaps it can be resolved, or it can be resolved for the next person so it doesn't
That's
happen
right.
again.
Thanks for inviting me tonight, Maxine. I really enjoyed myself. Thanks.
Fantastic. And as I said before, if you do want any more information, you're welcome to send us an email. Check out the websites, or check our website as well. We can
those
do
cards.
an old-fashioned letter, post these out to you. Please email us at info@vicdeaf.com.au. And just a reminder that we do have another Deaf Share presentation and workshop, which will also be live streamed next Wednesday. the same time, 6 till 7 next Wednesday, and that'll be talking about employment, how to apply for a job, interviewing skills, and then when you do get a job, what type of support can you receive at work? For example, can you have interpreters at work? If there's training provided, can I have an interpreter for that? So we'll be talking about that next week. It'll be here as well at the Preston Hub. So if you're really interested in checking out what the room looks like or the Preston Hub, you're welcome to come and visit us next week. And we have cheese and biscuits too.
And also, if you want to get in contact with Deaf Victoria, it's info@deafvictoria.org.au. Contact us anytime.
Great, fantastic. I hope you enjoyed this evening. Thanks, Sherry.